listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Do you know what Skibidi Toilet is? The viral animated YouTube series of singing human heads coming out of toilets and fighting an army of robot men with cameras as heads has somehow entered our language, our politics, and our schools. But what does that say about our culture, how we use the internet, and us?
Skibidi tells us so much about the last 20 years and what's been happening on YouTube, and the kind of creator, media, algorithmic culture that YouTube kind of has been inventing and has kind of changed so much of our visual lives.
Why Brisbane's Institute of Modern Art is exhibiting the world's first display of the viral phenomenon is coming up in today's Deep Dive. First, though, it's time for the headlines with Chris Spiru on Thursday, February 20.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. Donald Trump has accused Volodymyr Zelensky of being a dictator without elections who is doing a terrible job. In a post to Truth Social this morning, the US president has criticised the amount of money his country has spent in arming Ukraine, describing his counterpart as a modestly successful comedian who played Biden like a fiddle. His comments come less than 24 hours after he held a press conference blaming Ukraine for the war with Russia and falsely suggested Zelensky's approval rating was as low as 4%.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Yeah, it was in that press conference at Mar-a-Lago that Trump also commented on the US's latest talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia to end the war. Those talks took place without Ukraine or any other European leader. Now, Trump's new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, spoke after those discussions, saying there was a long way to go before a deal could be reached. However, both sides agreed to form a high-level team to negotiate a settlement to the war. And of course, we have heard from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said they will not accept any deal that is made without Ukraine at the table. Now, Zelensky was also quick to react to Trump's presser yesterday, saying the president is living in a Russian disinformation space.
And that, of course, brings us to this morning, and that reply is the reason for Trump's social media spray. Interestingly, this has all unfolded right as the US's envoy to Ukraine arrives in Kyiv ahead of a meeting with Zelensky. Keith Kellogg, who wasn't part of the Saudi talks, says the US is prepared to sit and listen and is respectful of Ukraine's sovereignty and independence.
So a quick fact check of one of Trump's comments where he labelled Zelensky a dictator who refuses to have elections. So it's true, Ukraine has not held a presidential election since 2019, which was when Zelensky swept to power. But his 5-year term was meant to end in May 2024. However, because of Russia's invasion in 2022, the country has been under martial law, and that means that elections are suspended. So there are national laws that ban presidential elections during war. That passed in 2015, well before Zelensky was in power.
And Sash, this latest between the US and Ukraine is kind of the worst we've seen it get since that invasion in terms of trading blows and accusing each other of things. It's important to note that Zelensky's really towing the line. He's being very careful in the words he's using. He's not coming out being incredibly critical of Trump. And there's a former national security advisor who served in Trump's first term who's come out this morning speaking a little bit about these exchanges between the two leaders. And he's offered up some insight that Trump learns conversationally. And what he means by that is that you have to sit Trump down and you have to tell him what is in it for him and the US to win him and get him over the line. So that's why this morning he's been urging EU leaders not to give up and to continue engaging with Trump, because that seems like the only way that we're going to get something good out of these peace talks for Ukraine.
So is he suggesting then that the way, Trump will lean whichever way he's just kind of been exposed to? So why? Because right now it sounds like he's very pro-Russia. He's very much on the Russian side of things, and he's come out so hard against Ukraine. Is the idea this former advisor is saying, well, this is because he's just had that conversation with Russia? Yeah.
So that conversation was a little over a week ago, and a lot of the language that Trump has been using in those press conferences and on socials very much echo the rhetoric that's being peddled by Putin. So, I mean, look, we already know that an emergency summit of EU leaders has taken place in France this week. This thing isn't going away. It is going to continue. So it's just a matter of waiting and watching.
Australia's intelligence agency has given a grim update on threats to our country with a warning we've never faced more national security threats at one time. ASIO boss Mike Burgess gave his annual assessment last night, saying 5 major terror plots have been foiled in the last year alone.
Beyond those egregious examples, multiple foreign regimes continually attempt to monitor, harass, intimidate and coerce cooperation from Australians and those who call Australia home.
He went on to reveal there have been numerous attempts in the same period to kill Australian human rights activists by hostile countries. In one example, an advocate was going to be lured overseas before being killed in an accident, Chris.
ASIO thwarted those plans before they could be carried out. There was also a warning about the upcoming federal election, with a number of nations likely to try to meddle in the campaign, but ASIO will be watching, according to Burgess. Concerns remain about anti-Semitism as well, with the threat of attacks still very much active as people continue to conflate Israel with Judaism. At his same update last year, Mike Burgess lifted the terror threat here from possible to probable, with no change to the threat level announced last night. Interestingly, Sash, Russia and Iran were both named as countries that could seek to attack and infiltrate Australia.
And this time yesterday, we brought you a story about an album of photos found at a Sydney op shop that featured the holiday snaps of none other than former PM Scott Morrison. Well, ScoMo's addressed the discovery and is asking for the album to be returned. So he spoke to the Sydney Morning Herald and told the paper it was accidentally included in a box of donations to the Salvos store, and he admitted it's all been a little bit embarrassing.
Surely it can't be more embarrassing than the Engadine Macca's rumours. But anyway, TikTok creator Charlie Fu revealed her find on Tuesday night, putting up a video showing photos of the ex-PM on overseas holidays in the mid-90s, an image of him apparently hung over among them. She's since deleted the video and claims she didn't buy the album, she just spotted it at the Salvos, and that's how she created the content. ScoMo has asked if anyone does have it to return it to the Salvos store that it was bought at.
Yeah, what a great story and a bit of a whoopsie from whoever put that album into a box. And I walk back my words yesterday where I said, I don't know if I believe this. Turns out it's true. Look, as well, just quickly before we go, I'm going to try and make a link here between Scott Morrison and Clive Palmer.
Good luck.
I don't know, Politics Australia. But we heard from Clive Palmer yesterday. He announced his new political party. It's called Trumpet of Patriots. And you guessed it, that's a play on Donald Trump's name because Clive's party supports the US president's policies.
Australia should be for all Australians living here. Trumpet of Patriots will put Australians first and make Australia great again.
Great again there. As you can hear, Trumpet of Patriots doesn't roll off the tongue. No. Clive's having a bit of trouble with that. Look, he was forced to create this new party because he lost his bid to re-register the United Australia Party in the High Court a little over a week ago. And apparently, Clive and Pauline Hanson had been discussing uniting their parties because there was this concern that their votes would cannibalise each other because One Nation and UAP are pretty similar in terms of their platforms. But they couldn't agree and they accused each other of trying to dominate the other. Surprise, surprise, that didn't happen. And word is Clive intends to run a candidate in every seat this election. And look, you know, we laugh at Clive, but in 2019, his advertising campaign was credited with trampling on Labor's ability to effectively campaign and advertise. And in 2022, he tried to do the same thing but wasn't as successful. He spent over $120 million to have one UAP representative make it to Parliament. So, yeah, we'll see how, what is it? Trumpet of Patriots. There you go. I can't get it right either, Clive. You're not alone. Okay, thank you, Chris. Next up, we are getting into an interesting deep dive. Helen Smith did this one, and she is diving into what Skibidi Toilet is. That's one thing. But Brisbane's Institute of Modern Art is actually exhibiting this viral YouTube clip. It's bizarre, it's weird, it's great. Have a listen.
Hey, it's Helen Smith here with the briefing. Independent Senator Fatima Payman ended one of her speeches with it. Teachers had to ban the phrase in schools, and it's also under investigation by Russian authorities. It's Skibidi Toilet.
What the heck is going on
Skibidi Toilet is the viral animation YouTube series of singing human heads coming out of toilets that's amassed over 18 billion views since it broke onto the scene back in 2023. The series has over 75 episodes and follows the singing toilet heads in a fierce battle with an army of robot men with cameras as their heads. It's sort of like the Gen Alpha, Gen Z equivalent of salad fingers. And with YouTube turning 20 just last week, Skibidi Toilet is reaching new heights. The series was created by Russian content creator Alexey Gerasimov, and residents in Russia have lodged appeals for the videos to be banned because of the detrimental effects they have on children, prompting the investigation in Russia. But in the Western world, it's reaching mainstream success, with film director Michael Bay working on a movie and TV series for it. And now, Brisbane's Institute of Modern Art is exhibiting the world-first display of the viral phenomenon. So why are younger generations so obsessed with Skibidi Toilet? It's entered our language and even made it into Parliament. You'll hear from Nick Aloisio-Shearer, the assistant director and curator of the exhibition at IMA, a little later in this chat. But first up, we've got Dr Nicholas Karah, the director of the University of Queensland Centre for Digital Cultures and Societies. Dr Karah, YouTube recently turned 20 years old, and series like Skibidi Toilet have been around before. How is this one different from other brain rot content we've seen?
One way to think about it is actually to say Skibidi Toilet's kind of interesting brain rot phenomenon to kind of reflect on 20 years. Like in some ways, it's like not different. It's like the peak of the YouTube mountain. Like maybe there's more to come, but like 20 years in, Skibidi tells us so much about the last 20 years and what's been happening on YouTube and the kind of like creator, media, algorithmic culture that YouTube kind of has been inventing and has kind of changed so much of our visual lives. So I think it's kind of interesting from that point of view. It's like 20 years in, this is what we've got. That's kind of what makes it interesting.
And can you briefly explain to me what brain rot is?
Not in a medical sense, I can't, but I think in a cultural sense, I think brain rot is one of a number of sort of terms we have for like almost like what it feels like now to be immersed in this endless scroll, which is almost like a technical design term for how platforms like YouTube and TikTok talk about what they've created. You get on your device in the palm of your hand, you're scrolling and swiping through content, and it becomes kind of like mesmerizing. And in some ways, it's like pleasurable and it's beautiful, like checkout, zony sort of feeling. But in other ways, often when we put the phone down, we're left with this feeling that our lives have not been greatly improved by whatever we've been doing the last couple of hours. And that, you know, some of us also are left with this feeling like, I can't watch a movie anymore, or like, I can't sit down and read a book anymore. Like, something has happened to my brain. Like, my brain's capacity to pay attention to things is sort of like rotted away. So I think it's like a way of us all trying to explain what really is a kind of new sort of human experience that we're all trying to like, it's like we can feel it, but we don't quite have the words yet to describe it.
What in particular do you think Skibidi Toilet tells us about how far we've come with YouTube series and the content that we consume?
Like, I think if you look back to YouTube, it kind of starts off as a site where some people are like, we've got these videos, how do I share them with my family and friends? Maybe if we all had a little channel, and then they're like, wait a second, maybe we're inventing a new kind of TV here. And YouTube's first like slogan is like, broadcast yourself. Like, everyone will be able to be their own TV producer. But YouTube becomes this big advertiser funded business. And it's like, we need heaps of content, heaps of it. And we're not going to get it in the way that traditional TV industries did, where they put huge amounts of money into producing, you know, reality TV, news, drama, blah, blah, blah. And so then you get this like absolutely chaotic explosion of genres as all of these people at home with like a webcam or a phone and a ring light start basically going like, what can I make? And so Skibidi is one of the many sort of series where what you can make is like, wait a second, what if I had like a game engine that's like used for making computer games? I use that to just rapidly animate worlds and stitch that together with sounds I find on the internet and whatever. So that's Skibidi is one of the sort of answers, I suppose, people come up with for like, I could make this. I guess the big unanswerable question is like, why does some of that stuff work? What makes it entertaining? Because, Skibidi Toilet would have never been broadcast on primetime television, but on YouTube, it's doing primetime numbers.
Yeah, so how did Skibidi Toilet become so popular and why? You kind of just touched on that. People are just making this content at home with kind of like dodgy looking animation. How did Skibidi Toilet become the one?
That's mysterious, I think. Like, imagine if you tried to make sense of the thousands of hours of video being uploaded to YouTube every hour. How something emerges from the chaos. I think that's like a divine mystery. Only God could answer it, sort of thing. But like, what makes stuff like Skibidi, go viral, I think, is that its sensibility is somehow attuned to the internet cultures of much younger internet users. And like here, we could look back in our popular culture. There's nothing new about that. Like some of the weird chaoticness of Skibidi sort of reminds me of some of the things people were saying about like MTV in the 1980s and 90s. Like this makes no sense. This is like people throwing slime at each other, these silly voices and jokes. And so I think like in a way, youth culture's always done this. And young people are kind of growing up immersed in these sort of game worlds, playing lots of Minecraft, making lots of jokes with each other through their characters in chat and so on. So there's lots going on in Skibidi that's like super familiar to younger internet users. And then I think why does something like it blow up? It's kind of its memeability, that it can be taken and recut and repurposed, either the sound or little frames or little sequences of the video, and you can do stuff with it. You can share it with your friends. You can take the sound and put it over the top of one of your own videos and post that to TikTok. So it's kind of, sticky ability to keep replicating itself and spreading outwards on the internet. And then, around that kind of ecosystem it creates, the actual Skibidi content is like the ground zero that people watch. And I think, when you watch it, it's funny and mesmerizing. In one sense, as an older internet user, it's like, it makes no sense to me, but it's like, this feels familiar. I get why stuff like this goes crazy in the feed.
Yeah, and I feel like people love to bring down memes or kind of these little pop culture moments that we have. What kind of scrutiny has Skibidi faced? Have people just been downplaying its hold that it has on this younger generation?
Gen Alpha really have like fully grown up without television. Like my kids have no concept of television. They are watching a lot of YouTube, and one of the weird things going on in YouTube is lots of this creator content that's super like machinima, made in game worlds, super repetitive. Years ago, this great critic James Bridle wrote this essay called "Something Is Wrong on the Internet" about all the kind of replica weird Peppa Pig videos that were on YouTube, and YouTube's gone to a lot of effort to clean those up, but there are all these kind of super weird Peppa Pig videos getting through the cracks where Peppa Pig was like a Nazi and stuff, and so there is all of this kind of semi-automated, super repetitive content on YouTube that our kids are watching, and it seems like you can't get away from it. And like previous generations, like the parents now, they grew up, a lot of them, watching really good publicly funded children's television, Play School and Sesame Street. It was like, the experts had decided this was the kind of popular culture that was good for kids and good for their learning and blah, blah, blah. And so I think a lot of the sense of dread and panic is like, what are my kids seeing? Like, who's making it? Like, it feels so non-narrative. It feels so chaotic, but our kids are utterly mesmerized by it. So I think it's all of that. Skibidi is like the front door to this much bigger anxiety people have about this, particularly kids under 10, this kind of world, on YouTube that many of them are spending a lot of time with. And it's increasingly normal for kids to spend a lot of time with this world. And it's in a way completely a mystery to anyone who's not part of it. And you're kind of sitting in the background going, I'm like completely disoriented here.
What are the cultural implications of something like Skibidi Toilet?
Look, I think at one level, it points us to, that there is now this really serious creator economy out there where lots of the content we're watching that's going viral, that is the kind of prime time of big, platforms like YouTube, like TikTok, is being created by these creators. And they're all trying to make a livelihood. Some of them are making heaps of money, like, the Skibidi guy would be cleaning up now. But I think one of the cultural implications for us to think about is to say, okay, like, this is an important part of our cultural world. It's an important site where, like, culture is made. For younger people, a lot of the culture they consume now is made by these creators. So we should take them seriously. And we should start to say they're really important in our culture. And if we care about the quality of our culture, we should care about them. And it's not to say we should, like, police them more or set rules about what they can and can't make. I think we could just be much more proactive and say, like, how can we support them? How can we support them to have better livelihoods, make better content, invest in the quality of what they make, have better relationships with the platform so that they don't just have to constantly search for the next crazy viral thing, but can instead, like, commit to building particular kinds of audiences or particular kinds of content because we agree that matters.
And Skibidi Toilet is kind of bursting now out of the internet world and into art galleries. Do you think it's worthy of being in an art gallery?
Totally. I mean, it's not only bursting into art galleries, it's like bursting into Big W as superheroes. It's apparently going to burst into Hollywood as its own cinema franchise. So it's clearly important because of the way it's fully spilled out of the creator cultures of YouTube into the rest of the culture. And so within all of that, why exhibit something like Skibidi in a gallery? I think it's because contemporary art galleries are a really important space in our society where people can go along and kind of not just see what they might think of as brilliant art, but see art in the sense that it reflects back to us our culture. It encourages us to reflect and think about what we think of as culture, what we think of as important modes of expression in our society, what role they have to play, and so on. And so the act of exhibiting, of taking a cultural form like Skibidi and putting it in the gallery invites us to think more seriously about it, but also, to think more seriously about creator cultures and what they're making and how we might think of them as not just rubbish, but as a kind of form of artistic or creative practice.
Nick, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
That was Dr. Karah there, but let's jump back to the question of why an art gallery would decide to showcase Skibidi Toilet.
It's a bit of a strange thing, I think, for a visual arts gallery like ours to show, what a lot of people think of as a meme, a bit of a kind of a viral video. But at the AMA, we're quite interested in cultural outputs, things like photography and video and online cultures that are at the forefront of culture. So things that are really pushing the envelope. So I was familiar with Skibidi Toilet, I think probably through Instagram Reels and seeing small snippets of it here and there, and, was kind of fascinated by what this bizarre computer-generated image was. We'd been working on a couple of other exhibitions which had in common this theme of cartoon violence, in particular dealing with issues of race and issues of queerness. And we were thinking about what we could put alongside that, which might give us kind of an insight into what's happening in contemporary video art. And when I thought about video games and this kind of like cartoon violence, Skibidi Toilet was the first thing that came to mind. So we thought about, how that might work in an art gallery. Showing 6-second clips from TikTok probably isn't the most ideal way of viewing something in a gallery like ours. So we talked to the creator, Alexey Gerasimov, also known as The Fuck Boom, about how we would display the work in a gallery. And we've decided to kind of distill it into a nearly 2.5-hour long single video, which is made up of all the small episodes of Skibidi Toilet.
Some people might criticise Skibidi Toilet and say that it's not art. What do you say to those people?
Well, I'd really encourage them to watch it, first of all. I think it's something that's really easily dismissed because it is part of youth culture. We often see that with new forms of media, that they're really kind of quickly dismissed or misunderstood, and institutions don't want to engage with them and understand what kind of resonance they might have with young people. I was talking to my director, my colleague, Robert, and he was saying that in the 70s in New Zealand, there were groups of artists and institutions protesting against people including photography in art exhibitions, which kind of seems preposterous now. Everyone kind of understands photography as fine art. But even nearly 100 years after its invention, people still kind of considered it outside of the realm of fine art.
Can you explain to me what kind of video art Skibidi Toilet is? I've heard the phrase machinima being thrown around a bit. Can you explain that for us?
So machinima is a portmanteau of the words machine and cinema. So it really refers to video art that's made through the use of video games. So they're either people that have kind of taken apart a video game or screen recorded themselves playing a video game and have turned it into a film or a piece of video art. There's quite a community online, especially on YouTube, of creators working in machinima, but there's also some really kind of well-known contemporary artists internationally who work in machinima, like John Raffman or Angela Washko. This kind of new media is emerging that people are starting to engage with at a kind of contemporary art institutions across the world.
How has social media and platforms like YouTube, where the web series kind of, took off in 2023, how have these platforms changed what we're seeing in art galleries today?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. Obviously, the kind of platforms that people create for and publish on actually start to really affect the content of that work. So Skibidi Toilet in particular, you kind of start off with these 6-second TikTok videos that are engaging and quite strange and surreal. And they kind of have slowly developed into longer form episodes. So they now go for about 15 minutes each. But I think ease of use of machinima tools, like working in video games to make films, you can create whole worlds quite quickly and quite easily and create quite a lot of content from them. So it's kind of no surprise that, Alexey is just like a one-person show, has made, a feature-length film out of these kind of video game toilets destroying each other. So that's quite an interesting, I think, thing about YouTube, is that it's, as a platform, really shaping how people make cinema, how they make TV, how they make video art as well.
And who is this exhibition made for? What do you want people to go away feeling?
I think what I'd like personally for people to do is actually to just sit with it for a little while. It's quite overwhelming. It's loud. It is a lot of kind of quite short scenes that are cut jumps. There's a lot of kind of jump scares, toilets popping out of heads and coming at the camera. But there's also quite a few kind of moments where these characters who are just destroying entire city blocks and kind of growing bigger and more monstrous, they kind of show empathy for each other. And it kind of makes your experience of the whole thing kind of really drawn out to sit down and watch it as a feature-length video work. I'm so used to this content kind of scrolling by and happening really quickly and not processing it. So I hope people kind of come and, are maybe a little bit entertained by it or a little bit troubled by it. I hope that they think about what it might be to make video work in this current moment and to engage with platforms like TikTok and YouTube, and to think about why Skibidi Toilet in particular has been so pivotal and so resonant for young people. What is it about the way that it deals with violence and, this kind of surreal imagery of toilets and heads and of people with cameras for heads? What do young people kind of relate to in that? And why is that not maybe happening in other parts of contemporary art or in other parts of culture?
Nick, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.
That was Nick Aloisio-Shearer there, Assistant Director and Curator of the exhibition, and you heard from Dr Nicholas Karah, Director of the University of Queensland Centre for Digital Cultures and Societies just before that. But that's it for this episode of The Briefing. Let us know what you think of Skibidi Toilet if you've just discovered it. Check it out on YouTube and let us know if you think it deserves to be in an art gallery. And we'd love it if you could share this app with someone else you think might enjoy it as well. And while you're there, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, just search for Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed this afternoon from 3. I'm Helen Smith. See you then.
Listener.